On today's Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, it's crossover time with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants, discussing if the Dodgers spending is a problem for Major League Baseball and some half-baked ideas on how to speed up the MLB offseason.
You are Locked On Diamondbacks, your daily Arizona Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's episode is brought to you by Jace Medical. Empower yourself when you purchase a Jace case, providing you with a personal supply of 5 antibiotics that treat 50 plus infections. Get yours today at jacemedical.com and use code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order. That's JASE medical.com. I'm the host of this podcast, Miller Thomas. I'm a multimedia journalist and a graphic designer. So please go check out my website, millerthomas24.myportfolio.com. On there you can see all my latest work, from my packages to my articles to my photos and my graphic design. If you want to see more content by me, just follow me on Twitter at CareerThomas24 for my personal account, or look up Locked On Diamondbacks about Twitter, Instagram for the podcast handle. And of course, thank you for making Locked On Diamondbacks your first listen every day. I would not be able to do this podcast without you, my loyal listeners, sharing, subscribing, reviewing, doing all that so I could do this podcast for you. Thank you. It's free and available on all platforms, so please continue to tell your friends. And one of those platforms is YouTube, so please subscribe to Locked On Diamondbacks on YouTube. But now, without further ado, let's jump into that conversation with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants. Now, Ben, I want to talk to you about the offseason and really the spending that we've seen this offseason, because one team, the LA Dodgers, has spent over $1 billion. I think the number's like $1.29 billion. I saw some graphic the other day that said the Dodgers have spent more money this offseason than the 29 other teams. I just kind of want to get your reaction and your opinion on, do you think the Dodgers spending all this money is a problem for the league, what they're doing with the deferred payments? Or are you like, you know what, 29 other teams, how about you step up to the plate and you open up that purse and you hand out some checks to some of these free agents?
Yeah, so it may be an unpopular opinion, but I don't really dwell on it or think of it as a problem because, first of all, I mean, like Ohtani's contract, as has been well documented, 10 years, 700 million with what, 680 million deferred. It's ridiculous on its face, but it's I think a lot of people maybe who aren't totally like up to date on the collective bargaining agreement and how the luxury tax calculations work, which would be like every casual fan, I would imagine, isn't thinking like, but in reality, the luxury tax hit for LA is valued at something like $44 million or so. And so it's not like they're only paying $2 million a year, which is what they're paying in cash. But so it is, in some ways, it is what they're paying. But in other ways, they're, in terms of the luxury tax, which is I think a more important point of calculation, they're getting hit with $44-ish million. And so basically the league determined and the Players Association determined the present day value, because you have to factor in like inflation and all that kind of stuff, because they're paying him. I mean, it's going to be crazy once 10 years are up and they're paying him $68 million a year for 10 years when he's not on their team. That's going to be wild to see like what the ramifications are there. But the league and the Players Association determined like what is the true present day value of that contract. And it's actually about, $450 million over 10 years, which is, more in line with what kind of makes sense. 700 million, I think, part of what they wanted, his representatives himself perhaps, was that number and the shock and wow factor of that number. But in reality, this is equivalent to a $400 $40 million contract over 10 years. It's just structured really strangely and uniquely. And as I said, the Giants have said, and Ohtani's camp, or even Ohtani himself, I read, said, like confirmed, that the Giants offered him basically the same thing. So like it's what Ohtani wanted, because he wanted to be able to, not, obviously 70 million a year going to one player would limit what a lot of teams could do. And so that's why he wanted to do it this way. But in my mind, like, why not just do a 10-year, $440 million deal? I think it's because of the shock and wow factor of the $700 million number. I don't know. Maybe he just wants the security of getting paid for 20 years instead of 10. I don't know why they did it that way. But yeah, the Giants were willing to do the same thing. So I can't sit here and say, yeah, it's a problem for baseball that the Dodgers did it, because I would have been doing cartwheels if the Giants had done it, And so, and then they also go out and get Yamamoto, but I think that contract was fair value too, because he's 25. And I think like a lot of teams believed this is an ace. This is like a frontline major league starter. And you don't often get access to these guys at that age. And so I think it was a fair market deal essentially for Ohtani, structured in a really weird way. And it was a fair market deal for Yamamoto. And I believe the Giants were also in on Yamamoto on similar terms. And Yamamoto said if it wasn't for LA, he probably would have ended up with the Giants. And that tells me that they were right there financially. He said he loved the city, which has been a point of contention kind of this offseason with certain people kind of bad-mouthing San Francisco or just kind of a narrative about that. But he said it reminded him of Osaka, Japan, and I don't know what Osaka looks like. But anyway, he really liked San Francisco. But again, it's like it's hard to compete with what the Dodgers have to offer. It's like, oh, you can go play with Ohtani and Betts and Freeman and, warm weather year round, blah, blah, blah. So I have no problem with what they're doing. I also don't overreact. And I feel like D-backs fans should know this as well as anyone. You can have powerhouse teams in the division. Mm-hmm. And by the way, everyone expected the Padres to like compete with the Dodgers.
Yeah, I did.
Yeah, we all did. Mm-hmm. And they didn't. So baseball is unpredictable. So you can spend all the money you want, but it does not guarantee you anything. Although the Dodgers are good year in and year out. That's a separate point, which is like they're already always good. So they're just going to be really good again. So in some ways it's like, okay, they're still just really good. But also, D-backs fans saw firsthand last year, you just got to get into the dance. With what 83 wins, 84?
I think 84.
84 wins.
Negative run differential. Yeah, negative run differential.
Yeah. And the Phillies the year before that, whatever their record was, it wasn't as good, And they took down the Braves this year. I think it was the Phillies, and the Braves were the best team in baseball all year long. And they just went down in the first round. You guys swept the Dodgers in the division series, right? Swept them.
Swept, baby. 4 home runs in that clincher in 1 inning, first time in MLB history. Truly remarkable stuff. So yeah, I mean, I can't wait for the discourse when the Dodgers win 135 games and then lose in the first round. It's like, oh my God, we got to redo the whole regular season. We got to change the whole playoff format. Right. Like, I don't want to hear any of that discourse. And I'm not upset with the way that the Dodgers went in terms of spending money, because if you have the money, I think you should spend it. Am I upset that the Dodgers keep getting all the quality talent? Yeah, I don't want to see Ohtani and Yamamoto go to the Dodgers. Yeah. They have enough talent on their roster, but I'm not upset.
I hate it.
Yeah, I hate it, but I'm not upset that they hand out those contracts. I am upset that you were like 3 months into the offseason and it feels like there's still most of the free agents are still out there. I am upset that it feels like a lot of the other teams just aren't aggressive enough. Like the Mariners are just salary dumping players left and right. It feels like the Kansas City Royals have been a top 3 offseason team this year because they're one of the only teams participating. Like that does make me upset when there's money to be spent and these teams are just sitting on their hands or not trying to improve their team. Like, that's what doesn't make me happy, because I feel like the MLB offseason, it's just so slow. I feel like it drags on. I feel like as you have to wait like actually 2 weeks before spring training starts to see actual transactions start heating up and happening. And like the Tyler Glasnow move, like that should be a move that gets people upset, because anyone could have traded for Tyler Glasnow. It just whoever had the best package and who was ever willing to give him a contract extension. Anyone could have acquired him, but of course it's the Dodgers that swoop in and take on the risk of, yes, he's always hurt, but we know when Glasnow is right, he's one of the best pitchers in the sport. But it's like, why are the Dodgers the only team willing to take on that risk? Is it because they're the big market and they have so many other stars and they can afford it? I don't know. I would like to see other teams get risky. I think that's one of the biggest issues in baseball. So many teams are just risk averse. And now I think we see like a team like the Giants try and go the other direction. I think even a team like the D-backs is like, you know what, let's get a little bit more risky. Let's spend a little bit more money, because you do have to spend money to compete. Yes, it was a nice story to see this D-backs team make it to the World Series, but at the end of the day, there was holes on that roster, and the D-backs went to this offseason trying to fill those holes. So I want to see other teams get more aggressive in the offseason. And honestly, I will say I'm not a big fan of the deferred payment. Something about that feels kind of icky. Like, if you want to sign Ohtani to $700 million, I don't care. But saying you're going to sign him to $700 million, even with what you said about the luxury tax, I still feel like that's kind of icky, saying you're going to defer 98% of the contract until after he's done playing. I feel like maybe the next CBA, we should relook at that. Maybe you could do like half of the contract or the quarter of the contract, but to defer like $750 million to after that guy's done playing, like, they're going to owe Mookie, Freddie, Ohtani, and I think one other dude like $800 million when they're all done playing. Like, that's all in deferred money to just 4 guys. Like, it's insane what the Dodgers money situation is going to be looking like in the 2030s and the 2040s. Ben and I will continue that conversation in just a moment. But first, I want to tell you guys about FanDuel, because if you want to place a little futures bet on the D-backs 2024 World Series odds, there's no better place to do that than FanDuel Sportsbook, because the NFL regular season is wrapping up, but there's still time to get in on the action with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets guaranteed when you place a $5 bet. That's $150 in bonus bets, win or lose. The app is so easy to use, and there's so many different ways to bet, like live same game parlays, find bets in the new Explore tab, make a parlay in the Parlay Hub. My favorite thing to do is the same game parlay. Whenever the Lakers are playing a mediocre team, I take AD over in points, AD over in rebounds, and that Lakers money line. But I might have to change up that third leg of the parlay, because the Lakers money line just hasn't been hitting enough for me recently. So if you want to place your own same game parlay, visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and make your first bet a layup. FanDuel, official partner of the NFL. Passion, drive, and patience. What brings home the winning trophy is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. From superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has got you covered. With over 122 million parts to choose from, for your #1 ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your part is guaranteed to fit your ride every time, or your money back. Because with eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to turn your car into the MVP and bring home that win. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Like, if we could do away with it, that would be better. But at the same time, it's like, I guess it's just, yeah, whatever I said earlier about the luxury tax and how it still affects them. Like, it would be one thing if like they only had a $2 million luxury tax hit on Ohtani for the next 10 years each year, but at least it's like it's actually somewhere in between 700 million and 2 million. And so at least there's that. But yeah, it's like they're even deferring money on Teoscar Hernandez, right? It's a 1-year deal.
I didn't see that.
Yeah, for like 9 years.
That's crazy. I didn't
on a
I'll look
1-year
that up
contract. Yeah, look it up right now. It's like 23 million total, and it's like 12 million is deferred over 9 years or something like that. It's just ridiculous. And
yeah, I see it right now. 850,000 a year between 30 and 2039. They're just kicking the can down the line. They don't care.
Yeah, and so I'm with you. It kind of ticks me off in a way that other teams aren't. I don't know. It does feel kind of icky, but at the same time, these are the rules, and so anybody could be doing this. And
so do you think maybe we need like a little tweak? Like, I'm not a fan of a salary cap, but I could be open to a salary floor. I don't think I would be opposed to that. I just think the issue would be teams would just start overpaying like 1 or 2 year deals, and then you're just overpaying like a dude who may not be as good. Like maybe that 8 million guy just goes to 13 million now, and that's how you get past the salary floor. I don't know if teams are automatically going to start bringing dudes for 30-40 million a year if you do that.
Yeah, I kind of defer to like the economists on salary cap, salary floor. I know there's a lot of like smart people who have kind of commented on the pros and cons of these things, and there are downsides that a lot of people don't think of. I mean, you're not talking about a salary cap, but certainly with a salary cap, there are downsides for real, and even with a salary floor, there are downsides even for players. And so I like an open market. But if I was a fan of a team like the A's, I would not, I would probably feel a little more strongly because, both of our teams would be above whatever the floor would be. Yeah. The D-backs don't spend as much as the Giants, but I don't think so. They've been a little more aggressive in recent years. And I think they've made some nice additions this year. But basically I feel like I need to learn more about the true pros and cons about salary cap, salary floor. I know that the players don't want anything to do with it, at least with a cap. And the league, didn't they form like this economic committee like last year? And so I feel like they're going to start pushing down the road as something that they want to do is have a salary cap. And so we're probably in for another contentious, potentially lockout after whatever it is, 2026 season, where they're fighting about all these other issues. And to me, like you said, I feel like the biggest issue on the table right now is the slowness and the boring nature of the MLB offseason, and that we've got to think of a way to fix it, because I do not believe that it benefits anybody, not teams, not players, and certainly not fans. Like if you're a fan of a team and you're like following the offseason, it's like torture. You're just like so slow. Like it's slow. It's like it drags on, and just like days and days go by and nothing happens. And it's because there's no deadline. And so teams and players feel like they can just wait each other out and kind of wait for somebody to kind of, you're playing chicken with each other for 3-4 months, 5 months even. And like the year when Bryce Harper and Manny Machado didn't sign forever, and they were like 25-year-old studs, best like top 10 players. Yeah, like and like there's no Bryce Harper didn't sign until late February. It's like, and it wasn't even a crazy contract. Looking back on it, I mean, it looks super reasonable compared to some of the. I mean, it was 13 years, 330, which every team in baseball would want a piece of that now. I feel like not every team would pay it, but
Yeah, he turns into the best player in the sport when the postseason turns on. It's like, what is
Yeah.
that not what you pay for a superstar? Like, wouldn't you want Bryce Harper? Like, isn't that what you pay a superstar for? Like, whatever the contract is, like to come in and just smash home runs and put the fear of God in pitchers when you're at the plate. Like, I know as a D-backs fan, at one point in the NLCS, after like game 1 and game 2, where he like led off both games with a home run, I'm like, can we just not pitch to him the rest of the season or the rest of the series? Like, I don't care if Schwarber goes off. I don't care if Brandon Marsh or JT Realmuto go off, but like, we cannot let Bryce Harper kill us. Like, I would rather walk him with the bases loaded, nobody out, than than pitch to Bryce Harper, because that's how scary he was. But the idea of a deadline is kind of interesting because we do that with the foreign players when they post. I've never really thought about that, but I would be kind of interested if it's like, 6 weeks before spring training, all free agents have to sign, or they have to, I don't know, wait until this day of the regular season to sign or something. I think that would be kind of interesting because there has to be a way to move the offseason quicker, because you look at like the NBA, like 70% of free agents are signed within the first week of the NBA because teams and agents and players are talking before free agency even starts. Like, maybe we need to add more tampering in Major League Baseball. Maybe there's not enough tampering going on beforehand because everyone's already signed. Like, as soon as free agency starts for the NBA, you see like 80 deals happen. It's like, how did you negotiate terms before free agency even started? How was that allowed? So maybe we need a little bit more tampering going on in the MLB offseason. But one thing that I have discussed in my pod, Ben, that I want to maybe throw out to you real quick, since you threw the deadline idea at me, I kind of wouldn't hate the idea of doing like term limits on contracts. Like, say you could only sign Ohtani to a 5-year max deal. Maybe there's not a limit on how much he can make annually, but I kind of don't like the 10-year plus deals because I kind of want to see Ohtani hit the market again. I want to see Yamamoto hit the market again. I kind of don't like the idea of one player just signing with a team for the next 2 decades. Like, I kind of want to see these guys hit free agency every 5 to 6 years, because I think that would also add to the intrigue of free agency if every year was like the last couple of years. We had all these loaded shortstops, and you had all these pitchers. The pitching class has been really good too. I just want to see more star players in the pool, and I think signing these 10-year plus deals, I think that kind of hurts the sport a little bit too, just from like an off season, off the field engagement with the fans and the teams. Ben Kaspick and I will continue the conversation in just a second. But first, I want to talk to you guys about Jace Medical, because I know we come to sports to escape from some of the crazy realities of real life. But can we just talk for a minute about preparing for real life? According to the FDA, pharmacies are running out of antibiotics like amoxicillin right in the middle of the worst flu season in over a decade. This is scary. I can't imagine a more helpless feeling than if a significant other or one of my kids got sick while supply chain issue kept them from the life-saving medication they needed. Thankfully, we'll be okay because of Jace Medical. The Jace case is a pack of 5 different antibiotics to treat a long list of bacterial illnesses, including UTIs, respiratory infections, sinuses, skin infections, among others. This stuff could happen to any of us. Visit jacemedical.com and complete your physician encounter. It will be reviewed by a board-certified physician, and your medications will be dispensed by a licensed pharmacy at a fraction of the regular cost. It's never been more important to be prepared than today. Go to jacemedical.com and use offer code LOCKEDON to get $20 off your order.
Yeah, my first thought on that is like, when the way the system is set up though is that the players don't reach free agency usually until they're around 30, right? And so if you put like a 5-year limit, then it would really hurt players, I think, because then they would reach free agency at an age at which the teams would no longer, for the vast majority of them, like if you're 35, unless you're like Justin Verlander, Max Scherzer, and some rare others, Ohtani, they're not going to offer you a lot. And so you do a lot better for yourself as a player, I think, that's why they end up getting these long-term deals, is because if they took a 5-year deal, if like in the open market, if they took a 5-year deal, they would definitely, I think, be leaving money on the table. And so then you'd probably want to push free agency earlier, which is something the players would love. Like instead of having to wait for 6 years of service time, like this was something they wanted in the last CBA, was to push it forward to like 5 years of service time instead of 6 to reach free agency. But the league like considers that a non-starter. And so it's hard because these two sides like are, you know, I don't want to say enemies, but they're very much, they have conflicting incentives. And the one thing I want to add about the deadline is because I've thought about this a lot, and I feel kind of dumb because I've never come to this idea on my own that I heard on a podcast. To be fair, it was someone who is very smart and involved in baseball who mentioned the idea on the podcast, and that's, you know, the president of baseball operations for the Giants, Farhan Zaidi, said recently on a podcast that I was listening to, you know, he was kind of asked about the slow off season, right? And what he mentioned was having like a 3 or 4 week deadline, just kind of throwing out the amount of time, could be 5, 6 weeks, whatever, but for multi-year deals, a deadline for multi-year deals. And so that way it doesn't like lock players out if they miss out on the deadline. Because I've always thought like, you can't have a deadline because I feel like you can't have the players give up that much leverage where like if they don't sign, they just like can't sign. I feel like that's too much to give up. But if it's a deadline for multi-year deals, the players still probably wouldn't want to go for that. But at the same time, Zaidi did mention that he brought it up, you know, with agents who obviously are on the player's side. And he said he hasn't heard a lot of pushback because they are in the same boat where they don't feel like this waiting game is really benefiting anybody. And for anyone who's pushing back on me listening, like you mentioned, there's deadlines for these international players. They've got these for Korean players right now. It's 30 days from when they get posted, and the Japanese posting window is now 45. It was 30, but it's now 45. But like you look at Yamamoto, he got the largest ever contract for a pitcher, topping Garrett Cole by 1 million. And you look at Jung-Hoo Lee, and you look at the preseason or pre-off-season expectations for what his contract would be, and then what he ultimately got, and it exceeded it by quite a lot. And so to me, if you look at these contracts that these guys with deadlines are getting, they're not leaving money on the table. It's just simply forcing the action. And so I think something like that would be so good for the sport because it is an entertainment business, and I feel like fans hate the off season. And that's not good for the game. And I don't think the teams like it. The agents don't like it. And the fans don't like it. You and I as fans and as like reporters or whatever we are don't like it. And so that's the best idea I've heard, because then, you know, guys who miss out on that multi-year deal, they can still sign and get a huge 1-year deal, you know, like that's the thing is like if somehow Ohtani like didn't get that multi-year deal he wanted, because it wasn't 700 million or whatever. Imagine how much he'd make on a 1-year deal because there'd be so much competition. It's like, we can get this guy without the long-term risk. So I still feel like players would get huge paydays even on 1-year deals. Yeah. I don't know. Certain players would probably be hurt by it, but for the vast majority of players, I think supply and demand would kind of play out, and they would probably end up getting essentially their market value anyway. And I don't know much about the NBA and the NFL and like the free agency. I've heard what you said 1,000 times. I don't follow it nearly as closely, but that sounds so much more exciting. And people have said to me like, well, you know, what's the difference? Because then you just have to wait the rest of the offseason. Once all the activity happens, you just sit around and wait. But the difference is you get excited about your team. You know, Christmas comes around, you could buy the jerseys of the players that you got, and you just kind of go into season mode and start thinking about the team that you've built, versus like agonizing over what are they going to do for 4 months. And
Yeah.
maybe they
'Cause
do
we're like-
something big, but you suffered like all the way up to the point where they do something.
Yeah, because we're still like 4 days out of spring training, and so many teams are still incomplete. So you don't even know like the exact roster that you're going to have going to next season. But like
Not
in the
even
NBA,
close.
yeah, after like 2 weeks of free agency, you're like, my team's like already locked in. Like maybe you make one more trade or something, maybe like a little signing, but like all the big pieces, they're already locked into place. So it's like you can kind of plan better for the future, and kind of like for our podcast too, it might be a little bit better, planning if we knew who's going to be on the team, locked in for the foreseeable future. So I like that idea a lot of the deadline, because if I'm a guy like Aaron Judge and it's like, I want to go back to the Yankees, but maybe we're at a stalemate on the contract. Maybe I'm like, you know what? Out of spite, I'm going to go sign with the San Francisco Giants 1 year, $50 million. Then I'm going to renegotiate with them in the middle of the season. So I do think that's a pretty fun idea, and hopefully we could get something implemented to speed up this MLB offseason. That's it for this edition of the Locked On Diamondbacks podcast. Come back later in the week for part 3 with Ben Kaspick of Locked On Giants to discuss and preview the NL West and who we might think wins the division. And as always, stay safe, stay healthy. Doses.